The cool evening breeze drifted through Madison Avenue, where the city's most prestigious stores lined the streets, their window displays glittering under the golden glow of luxury. Naomi Harris walked with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement, her eyes scanning the elegant storefronts. She had been preparing for this night for weeks. Welcome to Shadow Crime. Before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue creating even better content. Thank you so much. All right, let's get started. Tonight, she was searching for the perfect gift, a symbol of love, resilience, and 10 years of partnership with her husband, David Harris. As a top civil rights attorney, Naomi was no stranger to standing her ground. She had built her career on fighting injustice, challenging discrimination, and ensuring that everyone had a voice. But no matter how many cases she won, no matter how many barriers she broke, she was still a Black woman in a world that often refused to see her worth. Naomi adjusted her coat and stepped into Brooks Fine Jewelry, an exclusive boutique known for its handcrafted pieces, each one a symbol of status and refinement. The moment she entered, the atmosphere shifted. The warmth that greeted other customers did not extend to her. No one rushed to assist her. The saleswoman at the counter, Emma Brooks, gave her a glance, then looked away, as if Naomi's presence was an inconvenience. Naomi, used to this kind of silent dismissal, refused to let it deter her. She made her way to a beautiful sapphire and diamond bracelet, something she knew David would love. "Excuse me," she said, her tone polite yet firm. "I'd like to see this piece up close." Emma barely concealed her skepticism. She took a slow step forward, her lips pressed in a tight line. "That piece is quite expensive," she said, her voice carrying an edge. Met her gaze unshaken. "I would imagine so." She didn't reach for the display case. She didn't offer the same effortless service she had given the white customers just moments before. Instead, she studied Naomi, as if assessing whether she could afford to be in this store. "Perhaps I can show you something more suitable." Naomi's jaw tightened. "This is what I want to see." Tense silence hung between them. Emma sighed, but finally retrieved the bracelet, holding it as if it might disappear in Naomi's hands. She didn't set it down like she had for the other customers. She didn't offer any details about the craftsmanship or the designer. It was clear Emma Brooks did not believe Naomi Harris belonged here. Naomi examined the bracelet with care, running her fingers lightly over the intricate sapphire settings. "It's stunning. I'll take it." Emma didn't move. Instead, she crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "We require proof of payment before removing high-value items from the case." The room went quiet. Naomi's eyes narrowed. "You didn't ask the last 3 customers for that." Emma's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground. "Store policy." Naomi exhaled slowly, her patience wearing thin. "Then I assume you'll have no issue processing my card now." She pulled out her black Amex, placing it on the counter with the kind of authority Emma couldn't ignore. The card alone spoke volumes. It was more than just a payment method, it was a silent statement. She wasn't just someone who could afford to be here. She belonged here. Emma hesitated, but before she could reach for the card, a low voice interrupted them. "Is there a problem here?" Standing a few feet away was Marcus Lee, the store's security guard. He had been watching the exchange. He had seen Naomi enter, seen how Emma had treated her differently. And now he was being pulled into it. Emma turned to him, her voice suddenly dripping with false concern. "This woman is requesting to see high-value merchandise, and I just want to ensure store protocol is followed." Marcus didn't miss the implication. Emma wanted him to intervene, to remove Naomi, to reinforce her bias with official authority. For a moment, Marcus hesitated. He had seen this before. He had followed the rules before, and every time it left a bitter taste in his mouth. His gaze flickered to Naomi, then to the credit card still sitting untouched on the counter. And that was when he realized this wasn't about store policy. This was about something much uglier. He straightened his posture. "Ma'am, are you refusing to process this customer's transaction?" Emma blinked, taken aback. Because if she's following all the procedures like any other guest, then I don't see the issue." Naomi's eyes met Marcus's, and for the first time since walking into this store, she felt something unexpected, an ally. Emma's mouth opened, then closed. She had expected Marcus to back her up. She hadn't expected him to question her. With a tight, forced smile, she grabbed the Amex card and ran it through the machine. The transaction approved instantly. Naomi took the bag, her fingers wrapping around the cool leather handles. She had won this battle. But it wasn't over yet. Because what Emma Brooks didn't know, and what Marcus had yet to realize, was that this moment had set something much bigger into motion. Because Naomi Harris wasn't just any customer. She was married to David Harris, the man who owned the very building they were standing in. And when David found out what had just happened, there would be consequences. The cool evening breeze drifted through Madison Avenue, where the city's most prestigious stores lined the streets, their window displays glittering under the golden glow of luxury. Naomi Harris walked with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement, her eyes scanning the elegant storefronts. She had been preparing for this night for weeks. Tonight, she was searching for the perfect gift, a symbol of love, resilience, and 10 years of partnership with her husband, David Harris. As a top civil rights attorney, Naomi was no stranger to standing her ground. She had built her career on fighting injustice, challenging discrimination, and ensuring that everyone had a voice. But no matter how many cases she won, no matter how many barriers she broke, she was still a Black woman in a world that often refused to see her worth. Naomi adjusted her coat and stepped into Brooks Fine Jewelry, an exclusive boutique known for its handcrafted pieces, each one a symbol of status and refinement. The moment she entered, the atmosphere shifted. The warmth that greeted other customers did not extend to her. No one rushed to assist her. The saleswoman at the counter, Emma Brooks, gave her a glance, then looked away as if Naomi's presence was an inconvenience. Naomi, used to this kind of silent dismissal, refused to let it deter her. She made her way to a beautiful sapphire and diamond bracelet, something she knew David would love. "Excuse me," she said, her tone polite yet firm. "I'd like to see this piece up close." Emma barely concealed her skepticism. She took a slow step forward, her lips pressed in a tight line. "That piece is quite expensive," she said, her voice carrying an edge, met her gaze unshaken. "I would imagine so." Emma hesitated. She didn't reach for the display case. She didn't offer the same effortless service she had given the other white customers just moments before. Instead, she studied Naomi as if assessing whether she could afford to be in this store. "Perhaps I can show you something more suitable." Naomi's jaw tightened. "This is what I want to see." When a tense silence hung between them. Emma sighed, but finally retrieved the bracelet, holding it as if it might disappear in Naomi's hands. She didn't set it down like she had for the other customers. She didn't offer any details about the craftsmanship or the designer. It was clear. Emma Brooks did not believe Naomi Harris belonged here. Naomi examined the bracelet with care, running her fingers lightly over the intricate sapphire settings. "It's stunning. I'll take it." Emma didn't move. Instead, she crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "We require proof of payment before removing high-value items from the case." The room went quiet. Naomi's eyes narrowed. "You didn't ask the last 3 customers for that." Emma's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground. "Store policy." Naomi exhaled slowly, her patience wearing thin. "Then I assume you'll have no issue processing my card now." She pulled out her black Amex, placing it on the counter with the kind of authority Emma couldn't ignore. The card alone spoke volumes. It was more than just a payment method. It was a silent statement. She wasn't just someone who could afford to be here. She belonged here. Emma hesitated, but before she could reach for the card, a low voice interrupted them. "Is there a problem here?" Standing a few feet away was Marcus Lee, the store's security guard. He had been watching the exchange. He had seen Naomi enter, seen how Emma had treated her differently. And now he was being pulled into it. Emma turned to him, her voice suddenly dripping with false concern. "This woman is requesting to see high-value merchandise, and I just want to ensure store protocol is followed." Marcus didn't miss the implication. Emma wanted him to intervene, to remove Naomi, to reinforce her bias with official authority. For a moment, Marcus hesitated. He had seen this before. He had followed the rules before, and every time it left a bitter taste in his mouth. His gaze flickered to Naomi, then to the credit card still sitting untouched on the counter. And that was when he realized this wasn't about store policy. This was about something much uglier. He straightened his posture. "Ma'am, are you refusing to process this customer's transaction?" Emma blinked, taken aback. Because if she's following all the procedures like any other guest, then I don't see the issue." Naomi's eyes met Marcus's, and for the first time since walking into this store, she felt something unexpected. An ally. Emma's mouth opened, then closed. She had expected Marcus to back her up. She hadn't expected him to question her. With a tight, forced smile, she grabbed the Amex card and ran it through the machine. The transaction approved instantly. Naomi took the bag, her fingers wrapping around the cool leather handles. She had won this battle. But it wasn't over yet. Because what Emma Brooks didn't know and what Marcus had yet to realize was that this moment had set something much bigger into motion. Because Naomi Harris wasn't just any customer. She was married to David Harris, the man who owned the very building they were standing in. And when David found out what had just happened, there would be consequences. Naomi Harris had spent her career defending the innocent, but tonight she was the one sitting in a cold security office being treated like a criminal, accused, humiliated, judged without evidence. She sat stiffly in the metal chair, her pulse steady, but her anger boiling beneath the surface. She had done nothing wrong. And yet, here she was. Across the table, Marcus Lee, the security guard, shifted uncomfortably. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to believe Emma's accusation, but protocol demanded he investigate. "I just need to ask a few questions," he said, his voice neutral. Naomi exhaled sharply, her patience thinning by the second. "Do you have any actual proof that I stole something, or are we just doing this because a white woman pointed her finger and made a claim?" Marcus flinched, but Naomi didn't back down. "You didn't stop anyone else in that store. You didn't question them, demand they prove their innocence, so why me?" Silence. Because they both knew the answer. Marcus sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Look, I have to check." He motioned to her purse. Her jaw clenched. "Seriously? It's just protocol." "Fine." She pushed the bag across the table, her fingers tense. Marcus searched through it, his expression growing more uncomfortable with every second that passed. Nothing. No stolen merchandise, no missing pendant, just a wallet, keys, and a receipt for the anniversary gift she had just purchased. Naomi folded her arms, her expression unreadable. "Well, find anything?" Marcus avoided her gaze. This wasn't right. He knew it wasn't right. Check the cameras, Naomi said suddenly. Marcus hesitated. "You have security footage, don't you?" "Yeah, but then check the damn cameras." Marcus swallowed hard. This was the moment. If Naomi was guilty, the footage would prove it. If she was innocent, it would expose the truth about Emma's accusation. And deep down, he already knew what they would find. Mark pulled up the security footage on a nearby monitor. The time-stamped video played. There was Naomi standing at the counter, browsing. There was Emma hesitating before handing her the pendant. But no moment where Naomi took anything. No sudden movements. No theft. Nothing. Instead, something else stood out. Emma's hand. Just before she called for security, she had reached under the counter and slipped something into a drawer. She had hidden the pendant herself. Marcus froze. He had been played. Marcus turned back to Naomi, his throat dry. You didn't take anything. No kidding, Naomi shot back. Marcus sighed, unlocking the door. You're free to go. Naomi didn't move, because free to go wasn't enough. Because the damage had already been done. She had been escorted through the store like a thief. She had endured the whispers, the stares, the judgment, and Emma Brooks, still standing at the counter, still smirking, still believing she had won. That was not going to stand. Naomi grabbed her bag, squared her shoulders, and turned back to Marcus. This isn't over. This was bigger than her. As Naomi stepped out of the office, she felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about her anymore. How many others had Emma done this to? How many people had been humiliated, degraded, accused, without evidence, just because someone like Emma Brooks decided they didn't belong? Marcus trailed behind her, his expression torn. Naomi. She turned to him, her voice calm but firm. You saw what she did. Are you going to do something about it, or are you just going to let it happen again? Marcus had no answer, but Naomi already knew hers. She pulled out her phone. It was time to make a call to her husband, to David Harris, the man who owned the very building Brooks Fine Jewelry stood in. And when he found out what had happened, Emma Brooks wouldn't be smirking anymore. That evening, Naomi Harris sat in the grand penthouse she shared with her husband, David Harris, the city skyline stretching out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. But tonight, the glittering view of New York meant nothing to her. She had been humiliated, treated like a criminal. And worst of all, it had happened in a building her own husband owned. Across the room, David Harris stood in stunned silence. His sharp eyes locked onto his wife as she recounted every painful detail. Naomi had fought battles like this before, for her clients, for the unheard, for those who didn't have a voice. But this time, it was personal. They did this to you? David's voice was low, controlled. But there was an edge to it, a barely restrained fury. In my mall, Naomi nodded, they thought I was just another nobody they could step on. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. David's jaw clenched. He was one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. He had built his empire through calculated moves, ruthless strategy, and an unwavering demand for excellence. And now someone had dared to mistreat his wife in his own domain. That was unacceptable. This isn't just about you, David said, pacing now, his mind already shifting into battle mode. How many others have they done this to? How many walked away humiliated, without a voice, without power? Naomi folded her arms. Exactly. Their eyes met. They weren't just going to fight this. They were going to burn the entire system down. The plan. David Harris didn't just have money. He had influence. He owned the luxury shopping complex where Brooks Fine Jewelry operated. He had access to corporate records, security footage, and internal complaints. He could apply pressure in ways Emma Brooks and her kind could never imagine. This wasn't going to be just about getting revenge. It was about making an example out of them. Naomi sat forward. We need hard evidence. Beyond the security footage. We need witnesses. We need to prove this isn't just a one-time incident, it's a pattern. David nodded. We start with Marcus, the first witness. Late that night, Naomi and David met with Marcus Lee, the security guard who had been caught in the middle of Emma's false accusation, He looked hesitant, shifting on his feet. "I don't know if I can help," he admitted. "I just work there." "And you saw what happened," Naomi reminded him. Marcus sighed, running a hand over his head. He had been following orders that night, but he had also seen the truth, and for once, he had the chance to do the right thing. David leaned forward. "Emma Brooks has been working at Brooks Fine Jewelry for years. I refuse to believe this was her first time profiling a customer. If you help us, we can expose her. We can hold that store accountable." Marcus hesitated, but Naomi pressed on. "You know this is wrong, and you know she'll do it again." Marcus exhaled sharply, then nodded. "Okay, I'll help." And just like that, they had their first inside man. Marcus provided key information Naomi and David needed. He confirmed that Emma had a history of targeting Black and minority customers. He had overheard her making inappropriate comments in the past. He had seen her refuse service to people based on her own rules, not store policy. And most damning of all, he had seen complaints against her, complaints that had mysteriously disappeared. David's smile was cold. "That's all I needed to hear." He turned to Naomi. "I'll handle Brooks Fine Jewelry. You make sure this never happens again." The fallout. By morning, David's legal team was already drafting an internal investigation request. By noon, corporate management of Brooks Fine Jewelry received a formal notice of discrimination allegations. By the end of the day, Naomi was on the phone with civil rights organizations, media contacts, and local activists. This wasn't just about Emma Brooks anymore. This was about every store that thought they could discriminate without consequences. Every business that assumed power would always be on their side. Every person who had been humiliated, accused, or dismissed just because of the color of their skin. The end of Emma Brooks. Emma thought she had power when she called security on Naomi. She had no idea that Naomi Harris had the power to destroy her entire career. And Naomi was just getting started. The deeper Naomi and David Harris dug, the more disturbing the truth became. At first, they had believed this was just about one racist employee, one corrupt store. But it was so much bigger. This wasn't just a case of discrimination. This was a calculated attack, an attempt to bring down David Harris himself. And now, they had proof. With Marcus Lee's help, Naomi and David obtained internal records from Brooks Fine Jewelry, files that had been conveniently ignored, buried, or erased. Multiple past complaints from Black customers alleging racial profiling, reports of employees refusing service to minority shoppers, security footage showing similar incidents, people of color being watched, harassed, or accused without cause. This was not an isolated case. It was a pattern, a systemic issue. But then something even more alarming surfaced, a financial paper trail. And suddenly this wasn't just about racism. It was about money, power, control. The real mastermind. Brooks Fine Jewelry was managed by Claire Benson, a longtime executive known for her loyalty to the wealthy elite. She wasn't just covering up racism, she was actively protecting something much bigger. And she wasn't working alone. Through bank statements, emails, and corporate ties, David's team uncovered a shocking connection. Claire Benson had been working with Richard Evans, a ruthless businessman with a dangerous reputation. And Richard Evans had been trying to take over David Harris's shopping complex for months. Richard Evans was known for his cutthroat tactics in real estate. He built his fortune by forcing competitors to crumble. He used scandals, financial pressure, and dirty tricks to devalue properties before swooping in and buying them at a fraction of their worth. And now he had set his sights on David's empire. Brooks Fine Jewelry was just a pawn in a bigger game. By allowing racist practices to flourish, Claire Benson created a scandal that put David Harris under fire. By manipulating public perception, they were damaging the reputation of his shopping center. And if David's Mall became known as a place of racial controversy, investors would pull out, business would decline, and eventually David would be pressured to sell to Richard Evans at a price far below its actual value. This wasn't just a case of discrimination, it was a financial attack. The turning point. David sat in his office, staring at the evidence laid out before him. They had tried to use his wife to destroy him. They had underestimated who they were dealing with. This wasn't just about clearing Naomi's name anymore. This was about bringing down everyone who thought they could play him. Naomi leaned forward, fire in her eyes. They thought they could manipulate us, humiliate us, steal from us. Now, we make sure they regret it. David's voice was calm, but his decision was final. We're not just exposing them. We're going to make sure they never do this to anyone again. The battle had just begun, and this time, David and Naomi weren't just playing defense. They were going on the attack. The time for silence was over. For days, Naomi and David had gathered every piece of evidence, traced every financial connection, and built an airtight case that would not only expose Brooks Fine Jewelry, but also destroy the power play behind it. This wasn't just about getting justice anymore. This was about making sure no one else ever faced what Naomi had. And today, they were going to burn everything Richard Evans and Claire Benson had built to the ground. David and Naomi Harris stepped in front of a packed press room. Camera flashes went off like fireworks. Reporters from every major news outlet were waiting. Naomi stood tall at the podium, her presence commanding the room. Good evening. My name is Naomi Harris. I am a civil rights attorney, a customer, a Black woman, and recently a victim of discrimination at Brooks Fine Jewelry. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. I was falsely accused of theft. I was humiliated in front of other customers. I was escorted away as if I were a criminal, all because of the color of my skin. And I wish I could say this was an isolated incident. She paused, then lifted a thick folder. But here is the proof that Brooks Fine Jewelry has a long history of racial discrimination. Dozens of customer complaints. Testimonies from former employees. Security footage showing the store's pattern of racial profiling. David took over, his voice steady, powerful, and unforgiving. And if that wasn't enough, we have also uncovered evidence of a coordinated effort by Brooks Fine Jewelry's management to create a scandal, devalue my shopping center, and force a sale to a certain businessman, Richard Evans. Gasp filled the room. The story had just escalated from a racial discrimination scandal to a full-blown financial conspiracy. David dropped a stack of documents onto the podium. These bank records, emails, and legal correspondences prove that Claire Benson, store manager of Brooks Fine Jewelry, was working directly with Richard Evans to damage my business. They thought they could destroy my reputation. Instead, they've destroyed their own. The media erupted. Questions flew from every direction. The scandal was now too big to contain, and Brooks Fine Jewelry, Claire Benson, and Richard Evans had nowhere to hide. Within hours, Boycott Brooks Fine Jewelry was trending on social media. Customers shared their own experiences of racial discrimination. Celebrities and activists called for action, urging their followers to stop shopping at the store. And then the numbers started to drop. Brooks Fine Jewelry's parent company watched as their stock value plummeted overnight. Investors panicked. Shareholders demanded answers. The company had no choice. They issued an emergency statement publicly apologizing for the discrimination claims. They promised a full review of their policies. And most importantly, they fired Claire Benson. The woman who thought she could play a power game had lost everything in a single night. The end of Richard Evans. Richard Evans had been certain his plan would work. A scandal would devalue David's shopping center. Investors would back out. David would be forced to sell, and Evans would buy it for pennies on the dollar. But now, His name was being linked to an illegal corporate sabotage scheme. His involvement with Claire Benson was exposed, and no investor wanted to touch a man whose name was now attached to scandal and racism. Richard Evans had lost his credibility, his financial backers pulled out, and his dream of acquiring David's shopping center completely destroyed. David had crushed him without even selling a single square foot. Justice served. As the dust settled, Naomi and David sat together in their penthouse, overlooking the city they had just shaken to its core. Brooks Fine Jewelry was on the verge of collapse. Claire Benson was gone, unemployable in the luxury industry. Richard Evans had lost his credibility and his financial power. But more importantly, they had set a precedent no business could get away with this anymore. No corporation could hide behind its wealth while trampling on the dignity of others. David turned to Naomi, admiration in his eyes. We did it, exhaled, feeling the weight of justice settle in. No, we just got started, because this wasn't just about her. This was about every person who had ever been humiliated, falsely accused, or made to feel less than. And if anyone thought this was the last time Naomi Harris would fight back, they were dead wrong. The battle against Brooks Fine Jewelry, Claire Benson, and Richard Evans had been won. But for Naomi Harris, it wasn't enough. Yes, the corrupt store manager had been fired. Yes, the racist business practices had been exposed. Yes, the financial sabotage had been crushed before it could ruin David's shopping center. But Naomi knew one thing for certain. This was just one victory in a much bigger war. The bigger fight. How many others had been targeted just like her? How many people had been humiliated, profiled, or falsely accused without the power or resources to fight back? How many businesses, landlords, and corporations still operated in the shadows, quietly discriminating against those they deemed less than? The problem wasn't just one store. The problem was a system that allowed this to happen over and over again, and Naomi wasn't the type to walk away from a fight. She was about to start a movement. The Justice Collective. 1 month later, Naomi stood before a packed auditorium, the energy in the room electric. Lawyers, activists, community leaders, everyday people who had been wronged but never had a voice. They were all here for the same reason, to be part of something bigger, to be part of the Justice Collective. Naomi took the stage, her presence commanding as always. This isn't just about one case. This is about the people who walk into luxury stores and are followed like criminals. The professionals who are denied opportunities because of their race, gender, or background. The homeowners pushed out of neighborhoods by discriminatory policies. The workers who are overlooked, underpaid, and disrespected. Her voice grew stronger, her passion igniting the crowd. For too long, injustice has thrived in silence. Not anymore. The Justice Collective is here to fight for those who have been ignored, to hold corporations accountable, to make sure that no one is treated as disposable, because power only respects power, so we're here to make sure our voices are heard. The audience erupted into applause. This wasn't just a speech. This was the beginning of something unstoppable. A new recruit. In the back of the room, Marcus Lee listened carefully, his hands gripping the chair in front of him. He had been part of the problem. He had followed orders, he had played along, and he had seen the truth too late. But tonight, he was going to make it right. After the event, Marcus found Naomi backstage. "I want in." Naomi raised an eyebrow. Why? She didn't trust easily. She needed to know he was serious. Marcus exhaled sharply, gathering his thoughts. "Because I was part of the system that let this happen. Because I saw how easy it was to ignore injustice when it wasn't happening to me. And because I know exactly how people like Claire Benson operate. You need someone who knows the inside. Someone who can help collect evidence, train security teams, and make sure no one else is used as a weapon the way I was." Naomi studied him for a long moment. Welcome to the Justice Collective. And just like that, Marcus Lee became one of their first recruits. Not as a security guard, but as a protector of justice. The movement takes off. Within months, the Justice Collective was making headlines. They launched against major corporations for discriminatory practices. They exposed businesses with a history of racial profiling. They worked with lawmakers to push for stronger protections against systemic discrimination. And the best part? They gave power to those who had none. They gave people a voice. They gave people hope. David, watching from behind the scenes, couldn't have been prouder of his wife. She hadn't just won a case, she had built something that would outlast them both. One night, as they sat on their penthouse balcony overlooking the city, David turned to Naomi. "You know this is just the beginning, right?" Me smiled, her eyes glowing with determination. "I know, and I'm just getting started." The victory against Brooks Fine Jewelry had been only the beginning. Since that day, the Justice Collective had grown into something far greater than Naomi Harris had ever imagined. They weren't just a legal organization. They were a movement, a force that corporations feared, a symbol of hope for those who had been silenced, a living reminder that power only wins when good people do nothing. And now, another battle was about to begin. A new fight begins. The Justice Collective had just settled into their new headquarters, a sleek, modern office funded by donors who believed in their mission, when Naomi received a call. "Miss Harris, my name is Kendra Williams. I need your help." Kendra was a hardworking retail manager at a well-known department store chain, Haven & More. She had spent 5 years proving herself, outperforming colleagues, and receiving glowing performance reviews. She had applied for a promotion 3 times, and each time she had been passed over. At first, she thought it was just bad luck. Bad luck. Until she found out the truth. One evening, she had overheard her regional manager say, "Kendra's great, but she's not the look we want in leadership. Customers expect a certain kind of face in management. We need someone more polished." Kendra had frozen. She knew exactly what they meant. They weren't talking about her experience. They were talking about the color of her skin, taking the fight to the courts. Sitting across from Naomi in the conference room, Kendra's voice trembled with frustration and exhaustion. "I've worked twice as hard as my coworkers. I've hit every goal, exceeded every expectation. And still they treat me like I'll never be good enough." Naomi leaned forward, her expression calm but resolute. "Do you want to fight this?" Kendra nodded, fire in her eyes. "I do." "I just don't know how," smiled. "That's what we're here for." The Justice Collective got to work. They gathered evidence. They interviewed former employees. They combed through Haven & Moore's promotion records, and what they found was damning. Kendra wasn't the only one. Over the past 10 years, almost every Black or minority employee had been passed over for leadership roles. White employees with fewer qualifications had been promoted instead. HR complaints about racial bias had been ignored or mysteriously lost. It wasn't just discrimination. It was a pattern. Haven and More faces the consequences. Yeah. He filed the lawsuit, and the Justice Collective gathered witnesses. The media picked up the story, and Haven & More was officially in crisis. For the first time, the company had to answer for what it had done. They tried to settle, they tried to deny, they tried to bury the case, but Naomi Harris didn't back down. She and her legal team tore apart Haven & Moore's defense, piece by piece. Emails proving bias found. Testimonies from former managers recorded. A leaked training manual subtly discouraging the hiring of non-traditional candidates exposed. It was an open and shut case. The courtroom showdown. The courtroom was silent. as the judge read the final decision. Haven and Moore is found guilty of racial discrimination in hiring and promotions. The company is ordered to pay financial damages to Kendra Williams. Additionally, Haven and Moore must implement a new hiring and promotion policy under federal oversight for the next 5 years. 5 years. Naomi had won again, but more importantly, the system had been forced to change, changing the game forever. As cameras flashed and reporters swarmed, Kendra turned to Naomi, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for believing me." Naomi simply squeezed her hand. "You didn't need me to believe you, Kendra. You just needed someone to fight beside you." After the case, the Justice Collective exploded in size. Companies across the country were put on notice. More employees came forward seeking justice. Lawmakers began discussions on corporate accountability. Naomi and her team weren't just fighting battles, they were changing the rules of the game. The war was far from over. One evening, after a long day, Naomi and David sat together in their office, reflecting on how far they had come. David smirked. "Remember when this was just about one racist store clerk?" Naomi laughed, shaking her head. "It was never just about her. It was always about the system that let her get away with it, and we're going to keep tearing it down." The fight wasn't over. But the Justice Collective was just getting started, and nothing was going to stop them. The story of Naomi Harris, David Harris, and the Justice Collective is more than just a legal battle. It's a powerful reminder that change doesn't happen unless people fight for it. Too often, injustice hides in plain sight. It happens in stores, in workplaces, in boardrooms, and in everyday life. Many people experience it but feel powerless to stop it. How many people have been denied opportunities because of their race, gender, or background? How many have been humiliated, profiled, or dismissed simply because someone in power decided they didn't belong? How many times has discrimination been brushed aside as just the way things are? But the truth is simple. Injustice only thrives when people stay silent. 1. Power doesn't change the world. People do. Naomi and David had power, but that alone wasn't enough. They chose to use their influence to make a difference. They refused to let injustice go unchecked. They didn't just fight for themselves. They fought for those who had no voice. The lesson: it's not enough to have power. You must be willing to use it for good. 2. If you ignore injustice, you become part of it. Marcus Lee started as a bystander, just following orders, just doing his job. But when he saw the truth, he had a choice: look away or take a stand. He chose to stand up, and in doing so, he became part of the solution. The lesson? Turning a blind eye to injustice only helps those who cause it. 3. One victory isn't enough. The fight never ends. The Justice Collective won battles, but their work was never done. For every case they won, there were more people still suffering discrimination. For every corrupt system they exposed, there were others still operating in the dark. For every person they helped, there were thousands more who needed someone to believe in them. The lesson: change isn't a one-time event, it's a lifelong commitment. The world doesn't change on its own. It changes when good people refuse to stay silent. It changes when those in power choose justice over comfort. It changes when we all decide to stand up, speak out, and fight for what's right. Because at the end of the day, the greatest injustice is knowing something is wrong and doing nothing.